So, how do you know if you're a sovereign state, especially in this federalism sort of world? Well, the textbook definition says you need to meet three separate conditions to technically be a sovereign state. The first is that you have to have your own government officials. The second is you have to have the ability to tax. And the third is that you have to have an independent authority to pass laws. So think about our federal government has all of these abilities, correct? But the state governments and even local governments also have those three conditions met. So we have several layers of sovereignty here. You have a president, but you have a governor, and you have a mayor or something similar in cities. Cities have a wide variation on what they do. But they all have elected officials. That's how we know that they reached the threshold for sovereign status. If you meet these three, then the textbook says you've met the necessary conditions to be a sovereign state. A side note, however, this is one of those things where it's important to note that the practical definition of sovereignty really involves just other nations recognizing you as a sovereign nation, or in our case, the federal government recognizing you as a sovereign state. This is why issues like Catalonia in Spain, Palestine, any number of these regional conflicts across the world are far messier than the simple textbook version. But for the upcoming quiz, you should be aware of those three conditions and be able to tell me what they are. American federalism has evolved over time to look significantly different than it did back in days of yore, or even in yesteryear. As the figure shows, back in the night, some people say back in the day, I say back in the night, we have fairly consistently transferred power from the states to the federal government over time. This happens for a number of reasons. Some of the big ones are economic crises. When something like the Great Depression happens, we look to the federal government to fix problems with the economy. Think about the Great Recession, 10 years ago or so. And what happened was we looked to President Bush, then President Obama, to fix what was going on, do something. We need you to fix this economy. Whether it's the federal government's role, whether you can actually fix it or not, we look to them for guidance, and because of that, we transfer power to them. And you see as this line goes upward, it shows a greater transfer of power to the federal government and taking it away from the states. Similarly, wars also spur a greater national government role. We specifically see massive transfers of power during both world wars, and then again during the War on Terror post-2001. Finally, we have coordination problems that are best solved by the national government. This goes back to Lecture 1, these coordination problems where the states can't agree. Things like pollution, where states can often pollute while passing the consequences on to other states. Michigan can have all the auto plants at once, the dirty air goes over Ohio, Pennsylvania, etc., and, they don't feel the consequences. You also see issues like civil rights or voting rights, which are best solved by the federal government because states wouldn't take care of them in an appropriate way themselves. One of the big debates in American politics is obviously between those who believe in the federal government and those who believe in states' rights. So these types of transfers are important. Make sure you're aware of all the big moments in the chart on the slide here. I don't want to go through each of them, but I've already mentioned a few, and I want to draw your attention to the devolution movement and the slight decline in power of the federal government toward the upper right of the graph. In 1994, Republicans took control of Congress for the first time in 40 years, and one of their big issues was returning power back to the states rather than the federal government. So, at the time, Speaker of the House Newt Gingrich and the Republican Party focused on that, and finding ways to give the states power with some success. They looked poised to make breakthroughs when they had unified control of the White House and Congress for a while, but 9/11 helped the federal government take charge again. One thing to think about is the type of people who run for federal office and why they run. I'm a big political psychology guy and believe in behavior and motivations of individuals. And how many of these people do you think will run for federal office with the intent of giving themselves less power? The Netflix show House of Cards will tell you all you need to know about that question, and will explain why we see such a sharp upward trend in this figure.